Welcome to Unlocking the Parenting Code, all about boys. I'm Kathy, and this season is dedicated to exploring the unique world of raising boys. Parenting boys today can feel like trying to crack a complicated code, a mystery, especially when it comes to understanding their inner emotional world. Together, we'll dive into real life stories, share practical tips, and uncover insights to help you and your son thrive, not just survive. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's unlock the parenting code, one boy at a time. Welcome to the podcast where we dive into the joys and challenges of raising boys and together chip away at unlocking that parenting code. Today we have a guest whose parenting journey has been the catalyst for what her world looks like today. Liz Garcia is a dedicated wife and mother of 4, ages 20, 14, and 11, including adopted twins and 2 biological children. Her parenting journey has been anything but ordinary, marked by challenges that were far from what she had initially expected. Despite these struggles, Liz has embraced the journey with resilience and determination. Motivated by her own experiences, she has recently started sharing her insights and wisdom to help other parents who are walking a similar path. Liz, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
So you have a unique parenting story. 4 kids, 3 of them boys, and navigating both biological and adoptive parenting. Can you share a little bit about what that looks like?
Sure. Yeah. So we started with our twins. So I have boy-girl twins that we adopted internationally. And so we started with toddlers. They were 20 months when we met them. They were from an orphanage. We didn't have a whole lot of history about what had happened prior to us meeting them. Yeah, so they were about 6 years old when I had my first biological son, and then a couple years, 3 years after that, I had another one. So we started off with toddler twins, which is crazy madness. So
Mhm.
when I hear someone complaining about going from 1 to 2, I can't commiserate because I started off with 2
Yeah.
kids who never heard the language that I speak and had no idea who we were or what was happening. Um,
Wow.
yeah, so my experience starting off was a little different.
So did you intentionally decide to adopt before having biological, or what? How did you come to the decision there?
Yeah, so our plan, you know how plans work, right?
Hmm.
It's always a joke. So the idea was that we would adopt one and have one biological.
Okay.
So yeah, and so we just figured, well, we'll see what happens first, and then we started off with a boy and a girl, and thought, well, okay, well, I guess we're done. And then, a couple years later, I end up pregnant. Yeah, but
Wow.
we had specifically asked for twins too.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Why was that?
So my brother had just had twins, and I just thought it was fun. And I have twins in my family, and nobody thought it would ever happen. So it was
Okay.
like, yeah, just go ahead. And I like a good challenge. So they said, nobody will, this never happens where you could get young, healthy twins. So then when they called, they were, no, this has never happened. We've never heard of this. So
Wow.
that's how
Well,
we
meant
ended up
to
with
be.
twins. Yeah.
So what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced raising the boys?
So initially, I thought because I had a boy and a girl, I was looking for the difference really between a boy and a girl. So in my family, I'm one of 4. We have 2 boys and 2 girls. And my mother had always said, like, you'll see, boys and girls are different. They're so different. And I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. You never listen to your mother. Um, and so I was looking specifically, at least initially, for the difference between the genders because, I have twins and they have the same experiences and everything. Um, and my oldest son was and still is a very sort of introverted, calm child. He doesn't wouldn't really act up too much. He wouldn't talk back, things like that initially. And I would see my friends who have boys, and they would say, well, boys have to be boys, and they're running around and they're so active and this and that. And I was like, I don't know what you're doing, but mine is perfectly calm. And then I had my first biological, and he was very much the same way, very, very willing to sit down and read a book from start to finish and help out with chores and very kind. And then I had my youngest, who was born in an unplanned home birth on my kitchen floor and entered the world the way he lives his life. Like, the heck with you people, I'm here, look out, take notice. So I'm lucky enough to have a little mix of all of it between the four of them.
So what would have been the biggest challenge? So, okay, let's go back to the twins to begin with, because
Yeah.
that's a an interesting combination, and that they were from a different culture, different language, like
Mhm.
everything being different. And about that age, if they're getting close to 2 years old, so they would have had some experiences one way or the other that would, influence the rest of their life. So
Yeah.
how was that when they first came in? So you had them, sorry, how many years before you had your biological child?
They were with us for about 4 years.
Okay, so for 4 years you were parenting the twins only. What
Yes.
was that like?
So it was quite a shock. I think initially we were very much like any new parent, where you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Who is trusting me with these children? I don't know what to do. I'm not ready. But then you have to splash the cold water in your face and realize that you have to keep going. Um, and so we started. My kids would have temper tantrums, and we weren't really sure. You're trying to figure out, is it because they're tired? Is it because they don't know who we are and they're not understanding what we're saying? And so it was a lot of trying to figure out, like, what is a normal thing for this age versus a whole new situation. And is it normal for that situation versus is it completely abnormal altogether? So like my son would initially, we would hold him and he would just be like a sack of potatoes. He wouldn't hold on. And I had read all these parenting books and all these adoptive parent books about what to do. And so the biggest challenge right there was really to figure out how to console, how to be able to comfort a kid and let them know, like, I'm yours, we're stuck together. You might be mad about this, but I'm yours. So that was probably the biggest challenge. And then as they got a little older, just them falling down and getting hurt and not seeking comfort right away, which again
Okay.
was sort of one of those things that I didn't know because I didn't have biological kids, but that
Hmm.
I didn't realize that that wasn't normal. I
Okay.
didn't, I just was like, let me give you a kiss, let me give you a little snuggle if you're crying, you fell down, scrape your knee. And they were just like, not having it. So that was probably the biggest challenge of figuring out what is normal for that age, what is normal for a boy versus girl, and then what is normal for an adopted child, and the trauma background, and how it all fits together, and where my approach to parenting comes in.
So, were you home with them until they started school?
No, I was home with them for a couple months, and then my mom would come and she would watch them 3 days a week in my house. And then I was home with, like, so here and there, not full time. And then we did have a nanny that was with them 3 days a week, who my kids were from South America, and she also spoke Spanish. So she came in and really helped all of us, and was really their caregiver, for all of us. And we're still in contact, and she's like my best friend.
Wow.
And yeah, she came up for their high school graduations, and we're still very close.
So were they able to show signs of attachment with her?
Yes and no. I think a lot of it is, I don't want, pretend is such a strong word, but a lot of it was very superficial. They would act like they were attached, but then they wouldn't. And there was a lot of behaviors that they would do that because they would do them with her. And when I came home, she was always very, very positive. So there was a lot of things that I didn't really notice until she wasn't in the picture as much. Um, but we
But
had, oh, I'm sorry.
what would that have looked like? Like, what do you mean? Something that was apparent when she was there, and then something that,
Yeah. So, for instance, my son would get mad. Say his shoes were by the door. You'd say, "Go put your shoes away." He's 4, 4.5. able to put his shoes away or put them, in the spot where they need to go. And he would get irate and smack himself in the face with a shoe and just get like incredibly upset and lay on the floor and cry for 30 minutes. Um, so things like that I didn't necessarily see all the time, I would see here and there, but having talked to her about it years later, she said it happened multiple times a day.
So did it happen more with the little boy or with both of them?
More with the boy.
Okay. Do you have
Yes,
any
absolutely.
idea why that is or
I don't, at that age, I don't know. Knowing what I know now and looking back, I think it's that girls, at least in my situation, girls will sort of manifest inwardly. So where my daughter might get upset and mad at herself, she will stop eating. She just won't eat, or she'll go and hide in her room for a while, where my son would sort of let it fester and then get really angry later.
explode? Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Um, so then from your experience, what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions? Like that sounds about boys. Like that sounds like
Mhm.
one of them.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
else would you think people would expect to be the differences between a boy and a girl, but that you notice something different?
Yeah. I would say, and again, I came into it not knowing what their history was.
Yeah.
And so they came from a country that very much values boys and has a different expectation of boys. And so when he would start crying, it was a lot like, well, aren't you going to come and try to make me feel better and give me candy and give me all these things? Um, and I wasn't. And so I don't know if that was part of like the culture where he was from. And that was just, let's just love on this boy and try to give him everything so he'll be quiet versus the girl who's sort of expected to just cry her way out of it. Um, so yeah, but misconceptions I would say would be for him to just get over it and get on with things. Here's whatever you need. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. Um, and even when they were older, the misconception between the two of them just was school teachers of he wasn't doing his work and she was, well, can't she help him do his work? Well, no, he's perfectly capable of doing his work and she's not in charge of him. And, it was a lot of sort of helping the education system understand that he can also do this work and he's just as capable. And if he isn't, then that's a separate conversation, but it's not his sister's problem to try to intervene.
So how was that first year or the first 2 years when they started school? Were they in the same class?
No, I didn't want them in the
Oh,
same
yeah,
class. They're
yeah.
very competitive. They're very competitive, and he had his strengths in one subject, hers were in another one, and so they equally felt lesser in whatever they were weaker in. And I
Mhm.
really didn't want them in a classroom where they could see one on one. But they were in a very small school, so they had the same teachers, but they would flip flop. So one would have one teacher in the morning and then the other one in the afternoon. So the curriculum and everything was the same, but different teachers.
Okay. And did they thrive in those first couple of years?
Yeah. Again, according to their strengths, she was very social, probably more social than is socially accepted as acceptable in a classroom. And he would get really frustrated with himself if he wasn't doing well. He would get frustrated with himself and tap his pencil on his chair or um, hit his head with his pencil and say things like, "I'm so dumb, I'll never get this." And the reaction to him was, if you don't stop that, I'll send you to the office. But grade wise, academically, it was fine. It wasn't like he was failing. It was just his own self-esteem of not being able to pick up something right away.
So that's something that is one of the areas of education that maybe is lacking in that. And I wonder if you could see it like clearly with both of them. Like the idea is that little girls developmentally, they're ready for school when they start school. And
Yeah.
the system is geared towards how a little girl learns. And often in those early years, you're being taught by a female as well. So that's kind of that whole situation. And there's a thinking that it would be more beneficial for boys, little boys, to have that extra year to grow and develop their fine motor skills and their self-regulation skills, and so all of those things before starting an academic school environment. What do you think about that?
I think it probably depends on the kid. So in my situation, my twins were born in October. So it was like I could have had them tested to start earlier or later. And I consulted with my brother, whose twins were 6 months older than mine, and he has boy twins.
Hmm.
And he waited until they were a little bit older. And the way that he phrased it to me was that it wasn't so much of a problem when they were young, but then when they were about like 11 or 12, and puberty starts to hit, that there's such a big difference
Yeah,
between how the brain works and everything.
yeah.
um yeah, so, and looking back on it now, I think she was definitely more advanced socially than
Hmm.
he was, but she continued. That's part of her personality. So I don't
Yeah.
know if I would have held them back, if that would have made any difference at all, socially, because he's really, really smart. Taught himself to read when he was 4. I mean,
Mm. Yeah.
he might have been bored had I held him back a little bit.
Okay. One of the things that I read that you talk about is wacky behaviors that no one else sees. And I loved that phrase when I read it because, like, so many parents feel isolated when their kids act differently. So, can you share some of those experiences and maybe some of the strategies that you use to manage moments like that? Like, what is a wacky behavior?
Yeah. So a wacky behavior would be, for instance, I once saw my son take a jar of Nutella and he was eating it with his hand, like just scooping it out with his hand, and it was all over his face, and he had to stand on a chair to get to it. And then when I walked in, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And he was like, "What? I'm not doing anything." Just like I could see with my own eyes, you're
Yeah.
clearly doing something. Um, so things like that, or like he would throw away the younger kids' toys, like their favorite toys, or if they made a very pretty picture, and I was like, "Oh, I'm so proud of you. I'm gonna hang up your picture." He would throw it away or spill something on it. So, more than your typical sibling rivalry. Um, so things like that, and you would tell people, and they'd be like, "Yeah, I don't see that. He's so polite. He's so kind. I don't
Mm-hmm.
really see any of that." And then I mean, we at one point we had cameras in our house because things were getting destroyed and damaged, and then the little kids were getting hurt, and I couldn't figure out why, because there was all these accidents when I was in a different room, but when I was around, there were no accidents. And same with school, like the school didn't see any of these behaviors because he was fine with the teachers. And because he was socially awkward, he didn't really have a lot of friends. So there wasn't a lot of that going on. So it's very isolating because even your own family doesn't believe it because he's so engaging and he's so like,
Yeah.
he's having adult conversations, but it's not normal for a 10-year-old to have an hour-long adult conversation.
Mm.
So
So
yeah.
where do you think that's connected with, like early trauma? Is it because of low self-esteem and a need to, you know, push down so that he can be lifted up, kind of?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all of that. So I think the trauma comes in where, um, like I think the kids are constantly comparing themselves to their peers, which of course is totally normal, right? I mean, we all do that, even adults do that. Um, so I think part of it is that, but it's part of there's such deep guilt and shame because they feel that for some reason they caused the reason why they're not with their biological or their
Yeah.
original family. And so I think that deep seated feeling shows up when somebody else is having a good time, and maybe they're having a good time, but then they don't want you to think that they're going to be good or they deserve more, so they're going to hurry up and sabotage something. So I think it just rears its ugly head in the most strange situations.
Mm.
And
Okay.
it's, yeah. And so, yeah, I don't, it's all over the place, but a lot of it is self-esteem and just not being able to deal with it. And then as far as relating to adults, I think that's common too, because they don't get rejected as much as from adults as they would from their peers who would say like,
Yeah.
"You're weird," and an
Yeah.
adult is always like, they're happy to
Yeah.
talk to a kid.
So was that kind of behavior or that part of his character, is that consistent like up till the present, or did that change at any point?
It has changed. No, I would say it's still it's still pretty much the same. But
Mm,
now they're young adults and they're willing to go and they talk to other adults and they can have an intelligent conversation. But I don't feel like they need to um, prove anything. You
mm,
know, my son would have conversations. He would fool therapists into talking about, the biggest building in Dubai or something, these conversations that most 6 or 7 year olds don't have.
hmm.
So now that he's older, he has appropriate conversations with adults, and they don't last for an hour, and they're not like, I know this, and let me tell you these facts. It's more of an appropriate adult conversation.
Right. Mm, okay. Um, You also mentioned that it was important for parents, especially foster parents and adoptive parents, to advocate for what their child needs. So, can you share
Mhm.
some advice for parents who might be struggling to be heard in school systems or other support networks?
Yeah. So we were talking about being isolated, and part of that, you feel isolated. You feel like, I hate the term gaslighting because now it's so popular, but really the system and the environment is really set up to tell you like, no, I don't see that with your kid, or maybe it's just you, or maybe you're too soft on them, or they have terrible advice. So my advice for parents that are struggling to be heard, to be understood, is just to not quit,
Mm,
because we as parents, we want the best for our kids, and we have this assumption that professionals, meaning educators, physicians, therapists, all these other outside people, know what's best for our child. But in my situation, my kids lie.
mm,
So it's very hard for a professional to make an accurate uh, prognosis or something, because they only know what the child has told them. And then when I tell them something different, they don't believe it. So my ultimate advice is to always, always, always trust your gut.
mm,
If you feel like someone's not listening or they're not quite understanding, to keep pursuing it, trust your gut, and then get somebody else to help you.
yeah.
So sometimes it's just a matter of translating. You need a third person who isn't as passionate and maybe angry as you are, to just say, I think what mom is saying is, this homework is a problem and this is why, and it's not mom's job for this, this, and this. You need somebody else to help you advocate, even if they're just saying the exact same thing.
Yeah.
It's just having somebody else that can hear you and say it again.
Having spent, my whole career was in education, I can remember sometimes um, kind of the flip situation where, a child would be having, you know, explosive experiences, like behavior that was really not appropriate for that kind of an environment. And, meeting with parents and them saying, oh, well, he's perfect at home. We don't have any problem. And kind of like looking at you like, are you making this up? Or, the same kind of thing, but the flip side. And what
Yeah.
I found, and because you mentioned that at one point you used videos, so I know that that was kind of my thing. I thought, well, okay, I'm just going to set a video up, and not for blame or anything, but because in different situations, children act very differently. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering, since you said that you had used videos, did you ever use those like to like consult with a therapist or a behavioral therapist so that they could see what you were seeing, even when you weren't seeing it?
So I offered many times. There was a couple situations where my child would deny something and they would go, well, he says it didn't happen that way. And that was the end of the story. They had no interest. And I would say, I have video, I have recording, I have this and that. And they're like, well, he doesn't see it that way. So of course I'm wrong. The
Oh,
only time it came in handy was I was fighting with the school and they were saying, like, we don't see this behavior, we can handle everything. And there was some very, very violent activity. And I sent them some articles about some things that were happening in other schools and kids that were not being treated, and not, all the warning signs were there and they were being ignored and what had happened. And I had used that along with a video and said, you don't see this, but this is what happens in my house. But that was the only time it actually worked and we got the result that we wanted.
So, so how did you end up finding the right support for him? Or did you?
Ah, I did.
Okay.
Yeah. My, so between the two of them, they both have reactive attachment disorder, which is like an early childhood trauma disorder.
Yeah.
Um, and so between the two of them, the outpatient therapists, inpatient stays, residential treatments, they've seen over 30 therapists. Yeah, and only one has actually understood and helped us. And she, from the beginning, had said, I know these kids and I know what's going on. And she asked me questions that nobody had ever asked me.
Mm.
And it goes back to like your point, we see these things in school and the parents say, well, I don't see those. But if you point out the obvious, then you start to trigger like some memories of, oh, maybe it wasn't this
Hmm.
way. And maybe it's something deeper. And so she was really the only one. And the first day that my son met with her, we got back in the car and he was like, she's a mind reader. She knows exactly what I'm thinking. And he really, really had a meltdown. Like,
Oh, wow.
really had a meltdown. Like, we had to call crisis services. Um, because he felt like, I assume he felt that he was revealed, right? Now somebody
Mm.
knows what he's thinking and what his next step might be and all these different things. But she, initially I thought, oh no, this is too much, but that's really exactly what he needed. He needed somebody to call him out. He would go into therapist's office and say, "Oh, my family doesn't feed me. There's no food in the house. There's no nothing." And they would say, "Really? There's nothing?" And no. "Oh, she's starving me. Look at me." It's like, "Okay, you're not starving." And then she would say, "Come on, I see you. You're not severely underweight. Like let me see your teeth. Let me see this. Let me see, I, I'll
Mm.
come and visit your house tomorrow. We'll see what's in the fridge." Oh, no, no, no. So she would call him out on it. And initially I thought that's too much, but that's exactly what he needed because when people believed his lies, he was like, yeah, I can't trust anybody. So I'm just going to keep giving everybody lies. I work with her now to try to get her to educate other people about the disorder and help kids understand how their brains work. But
Wow.
she's really one of a kind. I've never met anybody else who can get straight and to the point and not afraid of kids being awful to her.
Well, that's really important to know because, like it would be easier as a parent to say, oh, well, I tried three different specialists
Yeah.
and nothing worked. So, I give up. So that after all that time and, many other therapists that you found the right one, that's really testimony to not giving up, trusting that
Yes.
and just, keep plugging away till you find someone. Yeah, good on
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Um,
It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. And I've walked out of many therapy sessions. So let me say that. Like I have
yeah.
I have not given up on my job. I have given up on many therapy sessions with
Yeah.
inappropriate conversations and
Yeah. Well, you got to trust yourself. Basically,
yeah,
that's the bottom
exactly.
line.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think the role is of a father or like a male role model in raising boys? Because you've got three of them there.
Yeah. Um, so I think the role of a father figure is really to, again, it's very much like guiding, like a mother would to guide them through life, but to give a different perspective. So my perspective of a female is completely different than what a male's perspective is. For instance, I was with my kid the other day and it was late at night, not late at night, but it was dark. It's wintertime here, so it gets dark early. And I wanted to park directly under a light in a parking lot. And he was like, why can't you just park closer to where we are? I said, because it's dark over there. I'm a female. I want to park underneath a light. And then, I was explaining to him, trying not to scare him. And I said, but boys and men usually don't have to worry about this stuff because like for me, I'm a female, so I'm always looking for safety. And when you are with your girlfriends, you're with somebody else, like you also need to consider how they feel. Now, I don't know if that's just me being me, or if that's something like maybe a dad wouldn't think of that. Um, and so I feel like my role is to sort of explain the female side of things. And then their father's role is to explain the male side of things, of, how you treat other people, how the world sees you. I know we both sort of focus, not focus, but we both have a very strong work ethic to really impose that upon them. And some of it's undoing what we've learned in generations past and how the world is changing and everything. But
Do you
yeah, just
think
to give a perspective.
do you think gender stereotyping has had any impact on how you and your husband view raising the children?
Yes, I
So
do.
how does that show up?
So probably more so well, I don't know. Yeah. So I come from, my parents were divorced, but my father was also from South America and a very machismo environment. And so even though he lived in America for the majority of his life, he still had that sort of, did you ask your husband permission for this? One year he sent us a Christmas card that said, Mr. and Mrs. instead of just, or no, he didn't even say Mr. and Mrs. He said Mr., my husband's name, and wife. So, all these things about like,
Mm.
put your lipstick on before you go out, those sort of things. Um, and my husband didn't come from that environment, but I think just from a generational perspective, there's a lot of, you wouldn't say that to a female, or you wouldn't say that to a male. You wouldn't expect this. And, so I think there is a little bit of gender bias and a little bit of that I'm constantly working to undo. And
Yeah.
maybe that's generational, maybe it's environmental,
So
but I'm
did you find so when you're thinking about your boys and a girl,
mhm.
like did you have similar rules for all of them? Was discipline different for the girl than it was for the boys, or some of those stereotypical results?
Yeah. So in a perfect world, I would love to say no, there was no difference. But in reality, I see my husband sort of giving my daughter like the expectation that she can clean this and do that, and the boys can take out the garbage. Things, they can cut the
Mhm.
grass and, so sort of stereotypes that way. Um, which, my goal is always to help my kids be as independent as they can. So, you live on
Yeah.
your own, you're gonna take the garbage out and clean the house. Uh,
Yeah.
So yeah, so I do see it. I do see it more, and I do try to call it out as much as I can of, this is not her job. And same with like just looking after the younger ones. It's not necessarily the daughter's job to look after the younger ones. The boy can do it too.
So what did that look like? Like after, when you actually had four children in your household, and how did you find that as a parent? Like, did you find any differences in like well, you said there was an attachment thing, but as far as your being connected, did you find any differences between having adopted children and biological children?
As far as connecting, yeah, I did. Um, so I would say again, going back to like the early years when they're upset about something, and my younger ones were quick to let me hold them and let them dry their tears and give them little snuggles and everything. And my older ones were like, yeah, no thanks.
Mm.
So that was a big difference. It still continues to be a little bit like I always have to keep in mind of how my twins think of the world and how they process things. So for example, my biological kids might come home from school. I got an A on a test. I got this. Look what I drew in school. And my twins would never tell me what they did in class, what they had experienced in school, they never brought home an art project. They never brought home a paper that showed me that they got an A. And I don't know if that comes back to that guilt and shame that they feel,
Mm.
or, they, however they feel. But my biological are all about, aren't you proud of me?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my adopted ones are not.
Mm.
So it's hard to connect when you feel like they're holding back. And
Well, it
I
almost
still feel that way.
it almost sounds like I would feel that they didn't need me as much as the
Yep.
biological kids showed they needed me.
Exactly. Yeah. And it feels like rejection a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of tough.
Yeah.
Um, Okay, flipping it a little bit. Tell
Yeah.
me, thinking of um, all four children, what can you think of as being like some of your proudest moments for each of those kids?
Whew. Well, what am I, because my son had, we had all these years, these really rough years. One of my proudest moments with him, two things was, one, I was telling one of the younger ones, no one will ever love you as much as your mother. And, you better believe it now. And the sooner you listen to me, the easier your life will be. And I hear the older one, the one who gave me so much trouble, go, she's right. So
Hmm.
I was proud that, he's at least recognizing. He might not, show it all the way, but he does recognize that
Mm,
I do whatever I have to do for my kids.
yeah,
So I was super proud of that. And at the same token, my oldest son, and we were talking about some of our elderly relatives and, should we look for a nursing home or whatever? And he said, "Oh, I'll never put you in a home." And I was like, "Oh."
oh wow,
So I was super proud of that too. Just from a parenting perspective, when it goes back to that connection, because I think,
yeah.
so much of the time we think they don't listen and they're not hearing this, and then it turns out that maybe some of it did sneak in there and it's coming back. They remember it.
Maybe
Um,
most of it. Maybe most of
yeah.
it. Give yourself a few more years down the road, and you'll see more and more of it coming
Oh,
back.
I hope so. Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
what would you say, like when you, okay, so those are proud moments.
Hmm.
What have, like I, as a parent, my son has been my greatest teacher and continues to be. What's something that you learned from having your children about you?
Yeah. Well, I've learned how resilient I can be for sure. Like
Hmm.
I didn't, I always knew I was sort of a little bit of a fighter, but I guess I didn't realize how tough I could be.
Yeah.
And we starting off the conversation of how people don't listen to you. And, maybe there's part of me that just would roll over and go, well, yeah, they're right. They know everything and I don't know anything, because I had so many people say, well, you're just mom, just be mom. And I would, come out guns blazing. Heck no, I'm not just mom. I am super mom and I am mama bear. And this is what we're doing. So they've really taught me to be resilient. Um, and then also on the same token to show myself some grace. So when I feel like a
Mm.
failure, when I feel like I didn't get it right, um, I've had plenty of those moments and I've been able to sort of reflect back and go, yeah, well, no wonder you were ticked off about that and no wonder this and the world didn't come crashing down and you are able to repair things.
Yeah.
It's not a one and done. So they've taught me a whole lot of things, persistence, resilience,
Yeah.
grace, all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. They really, they kind of make your world very different than if they weren't in it. So they
Oh
are a
yeah.
blessing, even though sometimes it can be challenging. They really are a blessing, and we learn a lot about ourselves and we grow, I think, incredibly through parenting.
Yes, yes.
I want to ask you two final questions, and the first one is just for fun to make it ending on a lighter note. So, what would you say would be the title for a movie about your family life, and then what would the movie summary or synopsis be?
Mm. So about our family life, it'd be something about like a queen bee or something, because I feel like I am the queen bee of my home. I have my worker bees. Everybody has a job. We all have the same goal, and we really need to work together to make it all happen. So it's not just about the queen bee, but we got to have all the pieces that work together.
Hmm,
So that yeah, something about a queen bee. Like
okay.
a little hive or something. And your second question,
What would the synopsis be? You kind of
yeah,
mentioned, yeah,
yeah, same thing,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, that sounds like a fun one. And the final question, if you could picture yourself sharing some wisdom with one of your sons, any of your sons, but the first one who will be starting a family of his own. So before his first child is born, what kind of wisdom would you share with him?
I would say to pick your battles. I feel like there's so many fights that I engaged in and continue to do so as my younger ones are growing up that really at the end of it, we have these big fights over something ridiculous, that meaningless in the grand scheme of things, where I would rather continue to build that relationship and, I'll empty the dishwasher than get into a fight and you don't talk to me for 3 days.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it's really just to pick your battles.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an important one, I think.
Yeah.
Liz, this has been such a valuable conversation. Lots of little golden nuggets in there. But before we wrap up, is there anything that I didn't talk about that you wish I had asked you about?
Don't think so. I think it goes back to trusting your gut. Even my kids are my kids. I did not birth them. I didn't have them from the minute they breathed air, but to trust your gut because you are the expert in your child and you know best.
Yeah.
And really that will take you further than most parenting books and most anything else. And
Yeah.
yeah, just to really trust your gut, don't give up,
Mm.
and you'll make it through.
Yeah.
It gets tough sometimes, but everybody makes it through.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Liz, where can parents find you if they want to connect and learn more about the simplified struggle?
Yeah. So I have a website. It's thesimplifiedstruggle.com. I'm also on Facebook, and I'm not so active on Instagram, but I do have a page there. And I talk to parents all over the place about their kids, specifically foster and adoptive families that have kids with usually it's reactive attachment disorder and some of the
Mhm.
the underlying behaviors that come, whether or not they've been diagnosed.
Yeah.
So just to, get them back on track and give them a little bit of hope because sometimes it is very isolating.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll put those things in the show notes so people can reach out to you. Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your insights and your story. And I know how precious a parent's time is, and I hope that you feel that I've honored your time today. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you, and I'm sure our listeners will walk away with many valuable insights.
Thank you so much.
And to all our listeners, if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other parents who might need this conversation. Visit Sonhood Coaching for more resources on raising boys. Until the next time, remember, you're not alone on this journey. Let's keep unlocking the parenting code together. If you're a parent raising a boy in today's complex world, be sure to explore sonhoodcoaching.com. You'll discover expert guidance and support designed to help you unlock your full parenting potential. As Amelia Gambetti says, this job is too difficult and too beautiful to do alone. Together we can explore this adventure and discover the magic of raising boys.